Hello and welcome back to my writing vlog series. I'm not going to mention the writing vlog number in this video this time because I'm trying not to focus that much on the writing vlog number, but I will state it in the title of this video. I'm recording this on May 13th, 2026. And in this video I'm going to work on 2 chapters, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. But those 2 chapters are Chapter 16, Consequence, and Chapter 17, Trials. So I'm going to read you the 2 outline bits I have for these 2 chapters. For the Consequence chapter, I have this outline. My male MC is angry. He's going through the 5 stages of grief, but his sister-in-law and her husband encourage him to just get over it. They're eager for him to reach the acceptance phase, but he's stuck in anger. And then I made a note at the end of this outline bit that says 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So I'm not quite sure how this chapter is going to unfold because I don't have any specific idea for the chapter. And I haven't really thought much about what I'm going to write in this chapter before I sat down to record this. But hopefully I will think of something. The outline I have for the Trials chapter is: my male MC finally moves on to the bargaining stage of grief. He tries to just accept it and move on, but everything in his house reminds him of the female MC. So that said, I've got something more related to this that I'm going to write later on in the novel, but first off I have to write these 2 chapters, chapter 16 and 17. What has happened so far in my story is that my female main character has died. She died in not the chapter before this one that I'm going to write now, but in the one before that. As far as I remember, I wrote a chapter where she died, but then I have another chapter where my male MC is trying to deal with losing the love of his life. So what I'm going to write today is going to follow up on that. So the female MC died, and then my male MC is trying to cope with this. And I'm going to write something in this chapter that is the consequence of the death. So the consequence of my female MC dying and everything in the house reminding my male MC of her is the direct consequence of him losing her. At first he was just grieving losing her, but now that he has had some time to think about things and has moved on to the next stage of grief, then he's in this anger. And maybe anger doesn't really go that well with him being reminded of her, or maybe it's just something that makes him think even more about how unfair everything is and how unfair life is that he has to go on living without her. Other things that have happened in my novel so far are that, among other things, this Charlotte has come back. She moved back into the ranch, into this secondary house, with her baby and her younger brother and her boyfriend. But her boyfriend died a few chapters ago, and she's trying to deal with losing him as well. Or she has had some time to process it, but she's still grieving him. And now she's living on this ranch with Pamela and my male main character. Pamela has come to the ranch too. Maybe there could be a kind of triangle, a love triangle, but I don't think that I'm going to go with that. My male MC is the kind of guy who likes one person at a time, and now that he has lost the love of his life, he has to move on and try to cope with that. He has got no time or no mental capacity to cope with anything other than that. And even though Pamela might be interested in him, he is not interested in her, at least not yet. But I've got plans for that for later on in the novel as well. The weather here in Denmark today is quite dreary. It's rainy and it's quite dark and it's quite cold, so I think the atmosphere of the weather kind of fits with what I'm going to write in this first chapter that I'm going to write today, because what is going to happen is based around my male main character's loss and how he's feeling about that and being angry and sad at the same time. So the writing atmosphere is kind of perfect for that. But the next chapter is going to be a bit different. When I read you the outline before, I mentioned that everything in this house on the ranch that my male main character is living in is just reminding him of my female main character. So everything in there reminds him of Penny. Penelope is dead. She's dead and gone, and he has to find some way to move on with his life. The scene that I'm going to write in this chapter 16, the consequence chapter, is going to have a lot to do with my male main character and how he's feeling, but I need to come up with something that incorporates him and other characters, and these other characters have to try and influence him to just get over it and move on with his life. Maybe it would be too pressing, or maybe it would be too strange if Pamela and Charlotte tried to encourage him to move on, because they really liked Penny too, and they didn't want her to die, of course, and they're sad that she's gone as well. My outline says that it's Peyton and her husband that are trying to make my male main character just move on with his life, but maybe it would be hard to do that. I already included some of that in the previous chapter, where they come over to my male main character, Kenny, and talk to him and try to appease him in some way and try to tell him that it's not their fault and that life goes on, and that I don't really state it directly, but they want him to get over it, and it seems a bit too easy for them to get over losing Penny, because Penny was Peyton's sister after all, and she should be sadder because of it, but she's kind of just, oh, life goes on. So maybe I don't really do Peyton any justice in that chapter, because I make her seem kind of cold and careless. She lost her sister, and she's kind of like, oh, it's not my fault, I'm sorry, and I'm sad that she's gone, but let's just forget about it, let's just move on, and life isn't that easy. Maybe I should try to incorporate her a bit more in this chapter that I'm going to write next, and show the reader that she's actually sad for the loss too. And maybe it's not that relevant, or maybe it's not that obvious a choice for me to just pick her as the evil character who tries to influence my male main character and just make him move on with his life. So maybe Peyton is struggling with it too, and maybe she's feeling guilty. Maybe I could use some of that, but I don't know what the scene would be, because Penny died and they have buried her. There was a funeral scene, and my male main character talked to Peyton and her husband, Dustin, after the funeral service, and it was like, oh, he can't deal with it, and he just takes off. So I don't really know how I'm going to incorporate this thing about Peyton and her husband trying to get my male main character to just get over it. But yes, I don't really know exactly what I'm going to write, but I guess I will figure it out as I start writing. But I better just get to it, and then hopefully I can get to write both of these 2 chapters today and then get back to you. Oh, and one other thing before I start working on the novel. What is going to happen in the chapter after this one is unclear as well, but I don't really know what I'm going to write in that chapter until I have written this first chapter. But I will figure it out, hopefully, and then once I'm done writing, I will get back to you. Hello again. It's about 3 hours and 15 minutes later, and I have now written the 2 chapters. Chapter 16, Consequence, and Chapter 17, Trials. In total, I spent 3 hours writing these 2 chapters, and since I recorded the first part of this video, I have written these 2 chapters and had a 15-minute break, so that means that I have been pretty effective today writing on my novel. Now that I have written the Trials chapter and the chapter before that, I'm almost done with the second act of this novel. I only need to write the last chapter of the second act, and that is the dedication chapter. And then I have all of the third act. And just as a reminder, that includes the chapters Calm Before the Storm, pinch, darkest point, power within, action, converge, battle, climax, and resolution. So it will be a while until I'm actually done writing this first draft, but it's getting there. Nature's Calling is going okay, I think, and it went all right writing these 2 chapters today. For chapter 16, the consequence chapter, I wrote 3,786 words. And for chapter 17, Trials, I wrote 3,514 words. That amounts to 7,300 in total. Before I started writing the first chapter today, I was like, okay, I have an outline, but it's very broad. I didn't really know what was going to happen in that chapter, but I figured something out. That scene is basically a talking scene. It's a scene where my male main character talks to Pamela and Charlotte and Timmy. The chapter starts with my male main character just lashing out verbally at the boy. I don't know what the boy said or did, but he's like asking questions to remind himself of something, and Kenny is like, stop bugging me, stop asking me all these questions, just, you know what to do, just do it and leave me alone. And he snaps at him because he's angry, and he's not really dealing that well with the loss of Penny. But then Charlotte comes into this chicken shed where they're arguing, and she's like, what is going on here? And then Kenny is like, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't snap at him, and he's embarrassed, and he's angry at himself for lashing out at the boy. And the boy didn't really do anything wrong, so he just hurries out of the chicken shed. And then outside of that, he just goes down on the ground and just starts crying. He's like dizzy, everything is spinning around him and he can't handle it. So it is quite similar to what happened in one of the previous chapters. But it's too much for him and he just breaks down, and then Pamela comes over and talks to him. And she's very attentive of him and she's very caring. And she's like, oh, come here, I'll give you a hug. And then they talk it out. And then Charlotte and Timmy come out of the chicken shed. And the boy is like, okay, is the coast clear now? Do we dare to come out? They comment on how it sounded like Kenny was done crying, and then they dared to step out of the chicken shed because they didn't want to interrupt what he and Pamela were talking about. But Charlotte is dragged into this conversation too, but the boy is like, okay, I'm not getting involved with that. So when the baby cries, the baby is in a stroller outside the chicken shed, and it's the boy's niece. So when the baby cries, then he goes over to the baby and plays with the baby to make it stop crying, and then the grown-ups can have this talk, and they are like, okay, we care about you and we worry about you and we want you to get better. But he isn't really coping that well. He isn't actually dealing with the loss at all because he's just angry and he lashes out at others, and he doesn't really want to do that, but he isn't coping well with Penny's death. And then that chapter ends with Kenny realizing that he needs to do something about this. So he's like, okay, you're right, I need to see someone professional. So he goes into the house to call a psychologist. That is what Charlotte and Pamela were trying to get him to do, but it's only when he talks to the boy it actually hits him that he shouldn't lash out at others and he really needs to get help. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to do this for my sake, but for other people's sakes as well. So he just goes into the house and then the chapter ends. Then the next logical step for the follow-up chapter would be that he meets this psychologist for the first time, but I decided to do a time skip to give Kenny some time to process grief and to try to move on. So when the chapter starts, when this trials chapter starts, he's like nervous and he's happy and giddy to go and see this psychologist because he has fallen in love with her along the way. A month has passed by and he's dealing better with this loss. He's coping a bit better after Penny has died, but he's like, okay, I can't fall in love again. And so he's like eager to go and see the psychologist. I named her Bridget O'Connor. I googled the name because I thought it was familiar, and a woman who died in 2010 was named that. She was pretty famous, I think, but I'm hoping that people won't mix her up with the character in my story. Maybe I should just come up with a different name for her, but I don't think that I will change her first name. He's kind of excited and he's getting better, and he isn't that angry anymore. This chapter is basically about Kenny talking to Bridget, and then along the way he reveals that he has fallen in love with her, and she's like, oh, okay, maybe that's my fault. Maybe I have done or said something that has made you think things like that, but she can't be involved with him. She's his psychologist, and then it wouldn't be right if they started to date each other. And so she's like, okay, if this is weird, then maybe you should probably find someone else to try and help you with handling this loss. He's going through these 5 stages of grief, and Pamela actually talked about those stages in the previous chapter that I wrote earlier. But she's like, I considered majoring in psychology before I started studying robotics. And so she's like, okay, I know a bit about this, and you're here in this stage, and then you have to go through these stages, but not necessarily in the same order. And you can go back and you can go forth. I know a bit about it myself as well, but it isn't a linear process, and it isn't a process that is the same for everyone. So Pamela and Charlotte were like, okay, you are here, but you're also kind of depressed, and you need to find some way to deal with all of these feelings. That was why he just accepted it and then decided to go to the psychologist. But then there was a time skip, and then there's this chapter. But Kenny and Bridget have this talk, and they're like, okay, I like you a lot, but you can't reciprocate those feelings. And Bridget is like, okay, you like me, but maybe I haven't been professional, and maybe you should find someone else. She has tried her best to not get too emotional or too invested in people's lives. And she stated that it has only happened once before for her, but other people that she knows, other psychologists, have had this happen to them several times, and she's kind of, I don't state it directly, but she's a bit proud that it has only happened to her once before, but now Kenny is the second instance where this patient has evolved feelings for her, and she's like, oh, I have done something wrong. But then she's also like, that's just a sign that you are capable of loving someone else, and that it's a sign that you're healing and that you're able to move on with your life. So she kind of just takes this and unwraps it, and then is like, okay, you feel this way about me, but it's not really me you like, it's what I'm helping you cope with that you like. Not the loss, of course, but he has fallen in love with her because she has helped him in some way, and that is different. So romantic love for someone can be for many reasons, but he's like, I love you, I want to date you, but she's like, I can't, I'm sorry, but you have to find someone else. Isn't there someone else you can give your attention to and affection to? And he's like, oh, there are other women in my life, but it would be weird because they're my colleagues and I'm their boss, and it wouldn't work. And when or if they broke up, it would just be weird, and that person would leave the ranch, and he needs someone to help him at the ranch, so he does not want to risk that. But the chapter ends with him considering going on dates with others. And that is what I have in my outline for the next chapter. He needed to have this realization that he needs to date other women in order to move on. And if he could fall in love with his psychologist, then he can also fall in love with someone else. And so it helps him that she's like professional, and then, okay, it's a sign of healing. You're getting better, and I think you should go and give your love to someone else. And then he decides to do that. He considers Charlotte and Pamela, but he's like, okay, Charlotte, he wouldn't date any of them. Not at this moment anyway, but he's like, Charlotte is busy taking care of her brother and her baby, and she does not want to get involved romantically with anyone. She lost someone recently too. And Pamela, oh, she's just perfect, and why would she want a guy like me? He's like, okay, I can't date any of those, so he just wants to go out and find someone else. That is what the next chapter is going to be about, I think. That's what I have in my outline at least, and this new chapter that I wrote fills the gap, because what I have in my outline, or what I had in my outline for chapter 16, was this thing about him trying to move on. The outlines for chapter 16 and 17 were kind of related, so I ended up including what I had in chapter 17 in chapter 16. And then I had to come up with something else for chapter 17. And I think this thing about the psychologist is an okay gap filler, because it fulfills a purpose. It has a purpose in the story. And it's like getting him past the grief and then ready to try and find someone else. So the coming chapters will be about him trying to move on and find someone else. And then later on in the story, he will end up with Pamela, of course. If you have watched the videos where I outline the entire story, then that is what I'm going to get to soon, I think. The outline for the next chapter is just this thing about him dating various women in order to try and move on and find a new love. He wants to have a new love in his life now that Penny is gone. He's like, okay, how can I ever love someone else? But he won't know unless he tries. But yes, that's basically what I've been writing on today. So I hope you enjoyed this writing vlog, and I hope you will watch the next one. Until then, take care. Thank you for watching.